Okay, we're going to be looking at a work by the composer Messiaen, and he was a 20th century French composer, and his music is very profound and very powerful and very complex. And the music, I think, is like no other that like I've ever heard. He really has a distinct voice. I would encourage you to read, before we go over this piece together, I would encourage you to read about the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time and kind of understand it, and also to read about the composer himself and his interests. And I want, after you do that, come back, after you read a little bit about Messiaen and after you read a little bit about this piece, I want you to come back to this video because then I'll highlight some things. So a few things about Messiaen is when he composed this piece, he was at the time a prisoner of war. That Germany had invaded France, and every young man in France was called into action to defend the country. And of course, Germany had superior military forces and was quickly able to capture a lot of French territory. Now, the thing is keep in mind that the camp that Messiaen was in was a prisoner of war camp. He wasn't in an extermination camp, which is a totally separate thing. I can't imagine that it would have been pleasant at all in a prisoner of war camp in the 1940s. It doesn't matter which camp it was or where or how. It can't have been a good thing. But I would imagine that German officers in the 1940s were culturally educated. That if you were an officer in the army, you probably had training in science, math, art, music, history. You understood your country's culture. You had national pride, and certainly there would have been at least one officer who was supervising the prisoner of war camp that would have recognized Messiaen's musical genius and found ways to make sure that he had supplies or equipment to be able to continue his music. So probably make sure there was a piano or a violin or an instrument or staff paper for him to write his music on. It wasn't that, and so there would have been, it would have been possible. Now I will say this, the cello that they had only had one string. So when he wrote this piece, the cello, it didn't have the three low strings, it only had the high string on the cello, which of course makes it very difficult to play a lot of the music. So when we see the cello part, a lot of it might seem very strange, but when we talk about how it only had that one string, it will probably make a little bit more sense. Another thing about Messiaen is he had many loves and hobbies in his life, and also some idiosyncrasies. One of his loves was his deep religious faith, that he was very devoutly Roman Catholic, and a lot of his music is very much inspired by liturgy. A lot of things that he composes come from Scripture. And the Quartet for the End of Time is no different, that it imagines Scripture from the book of Revelations as one of its points of inspiration. You'll be able to read more about that when you read about the piece. Another one of Messiaen's loves was he was an ornithologist. He loved birds, and he loved to catalog and listen to the sounds and the songs of the birds. Now, birds don't sing in a dodecaphonic key or scale, right? When, like, birds don't sing in F major or G minor, they just have sounds that go up and down. But one of the things that Messiaen did was he liked to take bird calls and write them out so it could be something you could play on an instrument. So even though it might not be E flat and A natural, he would round it off and make a bird call into like an E flat and an A natural. And he loved to have those birds in his music. The last thing that is a very interesting idiosyncrasy of Messiaen is that he absolutely he had a condition called synesthesia. Synesthesia is when your brain is wired in a certain way, so that way your senses become intertwined. A typical component of synesthesia is to see colors in words or letters. So, for example, if I wrote a letter A, somebody like Messiaen might associate that with the color red, and then if I write a letter B, that might be purple. Maybe a lowercase b is a light purple, and an uppercase B is a dark purple. Again, I'm just sort of making that up. But it could also be smell, right? Maybe a certain smell evokes a certain thing. Now, that becomes especially important when you're talking about a composer with a very well-trained ear who can hear all the harmonies and all the notes and all the pitches and all the music, and constantly is associating those sounds with like other senses. And sometimes that in itself can add to sort of a level of exoticism in his music. Now, that's a lot about Messiaen and when he wrote this and the conditions. Let's take a look at the piece itself. So we are on page 188, and this is the first movement of the quartet from the end of time. And I will read you just a little bit about what he said about this piece. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, the awakening of birds, a solo blackbird or nightingale improvises, surrounded by a shimmer of sound, by a halo of trills lost very high in the trees. Transpose this onto a religious plane, and you have the harmonious silence of heaven. Okay. Now, since you've listened to this first movement, let's see if we can better make sense of this score. So this score is in fact a transposed score. So what that means is that the clarinet part is actually not in C. This clarinet part is in B flat. So if we transpose it using the rule of C, all of these notes should be down a whole step. So this is actually not G, G, A flat, G. This is F, F, G flat, F. Right? So just something to remember. Now let's talk a little bit about some of these markings. This is French right here, and it means like a bird. And as you listen to it, you'll realize that the violin and the clarinet are actually imitating bird calls throughout the music. Now, this cello part is in tenor clef, and you're going to notice, if you look really closely, that there is a diamond note head as well as a regular note head on every note. This is a diamond shape, this is a regular shape. You'll also notice that these slurs are kind of weird. They really should go the whole way. I don't know why this company doesn't connect their slurs correctly. It's very irritating, but all of those should be ties, right? This note is actually tied over and held very long. So what the diamond note head means is it means it's an artificial harmonic. So this top note doesn't actually get heard because it's the harmonic finger. And since this is tenor clef, we know that this bottom note is a C. And because it's a harmonic, instead of sounding here, it will sound up here. So what's going on in the cello? The cello is using the thumb to play the bottom note, and then the top to play the harmonic note, and play really high notes, and get that kind of eerie sound by playing weird high harmonics. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the cello pitches specifically. In tenor clef, this is a C. Remember, this is the harmonic note, so we don't look at that. This is an E. And let's keep going. So we'll go to measure 4. That's a D. Again, we don't count the harmonic note. And we're still in tenor clef, that's F sharp. And then it's tied over. And then we have B flat, C, E, tied over, D, F sharp, E flat, C, E, and you'll notice if we keep going, E is tied over, D, F sharp, E flat, and you'll probably notice the cello all the way through has C, E, D, F sharp, E flat, 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 over and over and over. That's a row. It's not a 12-tone row. He uses a da 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 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1. He's using a 5-note row. And if we keep looking, we will find that there's actually a rhythm row. He has not only a row for the pitches, he has a row for the rhythmic durations. Let's start with this one. 8th note tied to a dotted quarter. Let's call that half note. 8th note tied to a quarter. Half note. Quarter tied to a quarter. Eighth. Quarter tied to an eighth. Eighth. I'm running out of room. I'm going to keep going this way. Eighth tied to... Oh, by the way, this is what my row looks like so far. And now we are down here, 8th tied to a quarter. quarter tied to a quarter. Half note. Dotted quarter. And this one is eighth quarter tied to an eighth. Eighth tied to a quarter tied to an eighth. Eighth tied to a quarter tied to another eighth. And at that point, we see that it started over. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. He has a 15 rhythmic duration row. So Messiaen's cello part has a row of 5 pitches, but it has a rhythm row of 15 pitches. So not only is Messiaen using a serialism for his pitches, he's now using serialism for an order for his rhythms. Now, I'm going to tell you that he also uses a row for the piano, and he uses a row of pitches and a row of rhythms, just like he does with the cello part, except these numbers are different. Now, obviously, since we have 5 pitches, I'm going to change this to a 5-pitch row. He has 5 pitches, and he has 15 rhythmic durations. That means every 15, it's going to recycle and be the same, right? Because it'll have 5, 5, 5, and then you get the new 15, 5, 5, 5. Like it will always work out symmetrically. With Messiaen's row in the piano, he actually makes the numbers bigger. And if we look, where do we get this chord again? So we're looking for an E, basically a 016 with, a 015, a 015 in this hand, a bunch of stuff over here. And if we look, we finally get this chord again way on the next page, right here. And then we start it over again. So you'll notice, like here is chord 1, 2, 3, 4, and when we get here, we'll get the same 4 chords. E, right, it has E, D, D, C, E, D, D, C, right? E should be starting there, and here should be the same group. So how many chords do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are time. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. And then it starts over. So he has a pitch row, a harmony row with 29 different harmonies, and then he goes back and restarts his row of harmonies again. And I'm going to tell you that he also has a row of rhythms, and the rhythms are a little bit easier to find because it starts quarter, 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 eighth, eighth tied to a 16th. And if we just look for that, we can find it again, and here it is. Quarter, 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 eighth, eighth tied to a 16th. So this is where the rhythms start over. So he has a pitch row of 29 and a rhythm row of 17. How many times would he have to keep cycling before he comes back to exactly where he started? you would have to do it 17 times 29 times, right? Both of these are pretty big prime numbers. So the idea is like this music can sort of go on forever, right? Quartet for the End of Time. At least this first movement, eventually it just comes to a stop. It would have been too long to do that many times. So there's actually a name for this technique where you have a rhythm row and a pitch row, but they're different lengths. And it's not something he invented, it actually came from the Middle Ages. This is known as an isorhythm. An isorhythm is where you have a row or some sort of line or set of pitches, and then you have a different length line or row or set of rhythmic durations. If we look at some of the Middle Age composers, composer from the Middle Ages, like Guillaume de Michaud, he wrote motets that used isorhythms, where you would have this one line, and then when he would start the pitches over, but he would still be working on the rhythms, and he would finally at the end come through and have all the rows put together. So this is a medieval technique that he's using for his music. My hope is that you appreciated these bird calls, which are very free. These sort of eerie, high, kind of ghostly quality of these really high cello harmonics on tenor clef, where they have the harmonic that makes it sound 2 octaves higher. So this C would normally be middle C, but the harmonic makes it sound 2 octaves higher. And then of course we have sort of the dark strangeness of this isorhythm of 17 times 29 rhythms and pitches. So that is the first movement of the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time.